Every 3D model I process goes through this critical step inside Houdini to create a UV proxy mesh. This results in a clean, artist-made set of UVW coordinates. So we have Houdini open, and we loaded our create UV proxy HIP file. At the object network level, we have a geometry processing network here. The first thing I want to do, actually, since we're going to be explaining this, is turn off auto update and set it to manual. That way we can set settings without Houdini having to update. If we select the geometry processing node up here in the properties panel, we have our input high poly mesh. Let's go ahead and set that to the OBJ file we exported. And we're going to export from this network a UV proxy mesh, which is a lower poly representation of that initial mesh with a base set of UVs and those poly groups all set up. So we just define that. I'm just going to say UV proxy for now. The triangle count is going to be 200,000. It could be whatever you like, but you want something that's kind of on the higher end, maybe like 5% of your total high poly count, 1% depending. This bucket model was, I believe, around 8 million triangles. Usually if you're dealing with models that are like 4 million up to 12 million, 15, 20, 30, something that's about 100K to 200K for the UV proxy is pretty ideal. This temp remesh triangle count, I'm going to leave that at 5 million for now. I'll explain that in a moment. Extract larger piece is part of the cleanup process. If we double click on the geometry processing, I'm going to maximize this tab. The first step it's going to do is load the high poly mesh, and it's going to do a quick cleanup phase. Just delete any attributes, clean up the mesh, delete small parts. If there's any like small floating bits that you missed inside of the cleanup phase, this node will catch it and delete those. If you have separate elements, like completely separate, physically separate chunks of meshes, it's going to find the biggest one and delete the rest. So by deleting, unchecking rather, extract largest piece, all the pieces are going to be maintained. It's just a handy little option. So it's going to traverse down through the SOP network. And at this point, we stop here. And this is where we start coloring the polygroups, just for preview purposes. This is where we set the polygon size for the remesh operation here. The division size is basically how big are the triangles going to be on this temporary remeshed mesh that we're creating in this network. And this is important just so that there's any geometry you missed that is kind of tangled up, intertwined, or otherwise ugly or broken. This remesh just takes your high poly mesh, regenerates it based off a polygon count you set here at the temp remesh triangle count. So I just have it set to 5 million. That's more than enough detail for this bucket, but from that point on, we're transferring all the polygroups from your high poly to that remeshed mesh, and then we do a very quick basic set of UVs. Basically all I'm doing is for every group, we're just applying some basic planar UVs to it, just so that the UV shells and UV boundaries are defined. Once that's done, we actually go over here and we reduce the mesh based on those groups. And this is what creates the UV proxy model itself. So to get that rolling, once we have our high poly and output UV set, we can just turn on the auto update and it'll begin to churn. Okay, I paused the video so that it could process. You may notice that there's a nice little progress window that opens up. Along the SOP network, I just have some debug messages to show you what step it's on. So it output the UV proxy, and let's take a look. So you can see that this is a decimated version of the bucket. But if we turn on the UV shell boundaries, this button here, display UV island boundaries, we can see the green outlines represent basically the edges of our polygroups that we cut, right? And so they're pretty clean, not very jagged, very smooth. And then it's just a matter of taking this model into Rizom or Blender or wherever you want to UV it and just finishing the UVs. So why don't we do that?